Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're the place you come to get those complex, foundational topics in tech and security really broken down, made clear, made actionable. Today, we are tackling a giant. It's what some call the ultimate gatekeeper of security for any company, identity and access management, IAM. This is CISSP Domain-5, and honestly, it's the bedrock. It's the cornerstone of trust for, well, pretty much any modern setup. Okay. Let's unpack this then. When we talk IAM, it's so much more than just typing in a password, right? We're talking about the whole engine, the system that governs who you are, what you're allowed to see, what actions you can take. And that could be accessing a physical server room or getting into a key application or even just connecting remotely, maybe from a coffee shop laptop. Get IAM wrong, just fundamentally wrong. And all those other security controls you've invested in, your firewalls, your fancy intrusion detection systems, even encryption, they can basically be walked right past by someone with a legitimate login.
That really is the critical point. IAM isn't a tool, it's a strategy, a comprehensive one. It's the whole collection of processes, technologies, policies, everything that manages and regulates access. And the scope, it's huge. We're talking access to the organization's most valuable assets. The information itself, obviously. That's paramount. But also the systems holding that information. The applications processing it, every single device connecting in. That includes bring your own device, mobile phones. Which means you need things like remote wipe capabilities if a device gets lost or stolen. And yeah, it even extends to physical places, server rooms, secure labs, data centers. It's where the digital controls meet the physical locks on the doors.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive, we want to cut through the jargon, navigate those foundational ideas, the techie protocols, which can get pretty dense, honestly, and look at the models for managing risk within IAM. The goal is to give you the context, the real depth you need, not just to know the terms, but to think strategically about them, apply them, basically to help you master this domain because it's just indispensable. Okay, so every time you interact securely online or even badge into a building, there's this sequence of events happening, right? A process. You often hear people talk about AAA authentication, authorization, accounting, but we really need to focus on a fourth step, the one that kind of solidifies everything, accountability. Let's call it the 4 pillars, Trigene.
Exactly. These 4 pillars are the absolute bedrock of access control. Identification, authentication, authorization, and accountability or accounting, which is the process itself. And they have to happen in that order. Sequentially. Often it's lightning fast, you don't even notice, but they're all there every single time access is requested. So first up, identification. This is step 1. It's simply the claim. A subject, and that could be a person like you, or it could be a system, an application talking to another application, claims who or what it is. Hi, I'm user Bob, or I am service X. It uses a username, maybe a unique ID number, a system identifier. It's just the assertion.
The claim. And like you said, in security, claims don't mean much on their own. So the next step is proof. The system says, okay, prove it. That's authentication.
Precisely. Authentication is the verification step. The system challenges that claim. It asks for credentials. Give me the password, or scan your fingerprint, or enter that 6-digit code from your app. Then it compares what you provided against its secure records, usually a database somewhere. This is the validation moment. If the credential matches, okay, your claim to be user Bob is accepted. You are who you say you are.
Okay, so I've proven I'm user Bob, I'm authenticated. But that doesn't mean I suddenly have the keys to the kingdom, right? Just because I'm Bob doesn't mean I can delete the entire customer database. That's where authorization comes in.
Absolutely critical distinction. Authorization is the what can you do step. It's the permissions check. The system consults its rulebook for Bob. After you're verified as Bob, the system determines the specific rights, the specific operations Bob is allowed to perform on a particular resource. We call that resource the object. For instance, can Bob, who's maybe an intern, read the financial report? Perhaps, yes. Can Bob modify or delete that same report? Probably not. No. Authorization defines those boundaries. It enforces policy based on who Bob is and what privileges he's been assigned.
And then the final piece, the one that ensures integrity, that provides the evidence, accountability.
Accountability, sometimes called accounting because it's the process of doing the accounting, is, well, it's essential. It ties it all together. It means meticulously recording every significant action performed by that authenticated and authorized subject. Think audit trails, system logs, who did what, when did they do it, where did they do it from. This creates a record, ideally an immutable one. It's vital for non-repudiation, meaning Bob can't later deny he performed that action. And, crucially, it enables forensic investigation if something goes wrong. An incident, a breach, even just an error. If you have solid authentication and authorization but zero accountability, a bad actor who steals Bob's credentials can run wild and you'd have no way to track what they did.
So if there's one thing for you listening to really lock in here, it's this. Authentication proves who you are. Authorization dictates what you're allowed to do once you're authenticated. They are completely distinct but work hand in hand.
Okay, let's move from those concepts to how we actually do authentication. We rely on what we call authentication factors. These are the pieces of evidence you provide to prove you are who you claim to be. And for any serious level of security today, we absolutely have to move beyond just one factor. We need multi-factor authentication, or MFA. That means combining evidence from two or more different types of factors.
Right, let's break down those types. The most common, probably the oldest, is something you know, knowledge-based.
Yep. This is your classic password, your PIN number for your bank card, maybe a passphrase, which is just a longer password, essentially. It also includes those static cognitive passwords, those security questions. What was your first pet's name or mother's maiden name? The big advantage: it's cheap, really easy, and inexpensive to implement. The massive disadvantage: it's inherently the weakest factor. Passwords get guessed, they get phished, they get cracked with dictionary attacks. We're seeing a necessary push towards passphrases, making them much longer, more complex sequences, because that significantly increases the difficulty for attackers trying to brute force them.
Okay, factor type 2, something you have. This is about possession, owning a physical thing.
Exactly. This could be a physical key, like for a server rack, or an access card, like a hotel key card or your office badge, or, very commonly now, cryptographic tokens. These can be little hardware devices you carry on your keychain. We call those hard tokens, like the old RSA-secured fobs. Or they can be apps on your smartphone, soft tokens, like Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator. Both generate one-time passwords, or OTPs.
And there are different ways those OTPs get generated, right? Synchronous versus asynchronous.
Correct. It's important to understand the difference. Synchronous tokens are usually time-based. TOTP is the standard. The key idea here is synchronization. Both the token, your app or device, and the authentication server share a secret key. They also share a common understanding of the current time. Based on that shared secret and the time interval, usually 30 or 60 seconds, they both independently calculate the same OTP code. For this to work, their clocks have to be closely synchronized. If they drift too far apart, the codes won't match and authentication fails. Asynchronous tokens work differently. They don't rely on time. Typically, they use a challenge or response method. The server sends your client a unique random value. We call this a nonce, meaning number used once. You, the user, might have to type this nonce into your token device. The device then uses its shared secret key to perform a cryptographic operation on that nonce, maybe encrypt it or hash it. The result is the OTP, which you send back to the server. The server performs the same calculation and checks if the results match. This avoids the whole clock synchronization problem, which can be useful in some environments.
Sticking with something you have, let's talk cards. You mentioned access cards. There's a big difference between a basic magnetic stripe card and a smut card, isn't there?
Huge difference. A memory card, like your typical credit card with a magnetic stripe, just stores data. That's it. It doesn't process anything. And that magnetic stripe data is notoriously easy to copy or skim. A smart card, on the other hand, has an actual integrated circuit chip embedded in it, a tiny microprocessor. This means it can process information. It can perform cryptographic calculations, securely store secret keys, run small applications. Crucially, they are designed to be tamper-resistant. If someone tries to physically break into the chip to get the secret key, it might be designed to self-destruct or wipe its memory. Much, much higher level of security assurance.
Okay, that brings us to the third core factor type. Something you are, biometrics, using your unique physical self.
Right. Biometrics leverages unique biological or behavioral traits. We usually split these into two main categories. Physiological biometrics are about your physical characteristics, what you are. I think fingerprint scans, retina scans, looking at the blood vessel pattern at the back of your eye, iris patterns at the colored part of your eye, hand geometry, palm scans. Then there's behavioral biometrics, which is about how you act. Things like signature dynamics, not just the look of your signature, but the speed, pressure, and timing as you sign. Or keystroke dynamics, the rhythm and timing of how you type.
Now, with biometrics, accuracy is everything. You hear vendors making claims, but we need objective measures. This involves understanding two key error types, right?
Absolutely critical. You're balancing security against usability here.
Yeah.
The first error type is false rejection rate, or FRR. This is also called a type I error. This is when a legitimate, authorized user tries to authenticate, but the system incorrectly rejects them. Sorry, I don't recognize your fingerprint. If your FRR is too high, users get incredibly frustrated. It leads to help desk calls, people trying to bypass the system. It impacts productivity. The second error type is the false acceptance rate, or FAR. This is the type 2 error. And this is the big security risk. It's when an unauthorized person, an imposter, tries to authenticate, and the system incorrectly accepts them. It lets the bad guy in. Obviously, you want this rate to be as close to 0 as possible.
So there's this constant trade-off. If you make the system super sensitive to reduce FAR, letting bad guys in, you probably increase FRR, annoying good guys. How do we measure the overall quality then? There's a specific metric.
There is. The single most important impartial measure of a biometric system's accuracy is the crossover error rate, or CER, sometimes called the equal error rate, ER. Imagine plotting the FRR and FAR curves on a graph as you adjust the system's sensitivity. The CER is the point where those two curves intersect, where the false rejection rate is exactly equal to the false acceptance rate. A lower CER percentage indicates a more accurate system overall. It means the system can achieve a better balance, minimizing both types of error simultaneously at its optimal setting. When you're comparing biometric systems, the CER is the key number to look at. A lower CER generally costs more because it represents better underlying technology and algorithms. Okay, that makes sense. Now, to bring some standardization, especially for government use or regulated industries, NIST has defined specific levels of trust for authentication. These authentication assurance levels, or AALs. Yes, this comes from NIST Special Publication 863B. It defines 3 levels. AL1 is the lowest level, basic confidence. It can be satisfied by single-factor authentication, like just a password, although MFA is permitted. It offers some resistance to replay attacks, but is generally vulnerable to phishing and other online threats.
So probably not good enough for most sensitive access.
Generally not. That's where AL2 comes in. This provides high confidence. It requires multi-factor authentication. And critically, it requires evidence that the authentication protocols used are resistant to online guessing, eavesdropping, replay attacks, and man-in-the-middle attacks. This often involves using cryptographic protocols. AL2 is considered suitable for most standard online transactions and corporate access.
And then the highest level, AAL3.
AAL3 provides very high confidence. This level mandates hardware-based MFA. You need a hard cryptographic token, a physical device like a smart card, or USB security key that's resistant to tampering. Software tokens on your phone generally don't qualify for AAL3 on their own. It also requires authentication mechanisms that resist sophisticated attacks, like verifier impersonation, where the attacker pretends to be the authentication server, and advanced phishing attacks targeting the authenticator itself. AAL3 is reserved for really high-risk situations. Critical infrastructure control systems, accessing highly classified government data, major financial transactions, places where compromise is simply unacceptable.
Okay, now let's face reality. Even with MFA and AALs, credentials are still under constant attack. What are some of the common ways attackers try to steal or bypass them?
Oh, the list is long. Beyond the basic dictionary attacks, trying common words, and brute force attacks, trying every possible combination, attackers get more sophisticated. A major threat is the use of rainbow tables. If attackers manage to steal a database of hashed passwords, even salted ones, rainbow tables are pre-computed lookup tables. They contain hashes for millions or billions of likely passwords. This allows attackers to very quickly reverse the hash and find the original password, much faster than trying to crack each hash individually.
Ouch. And phishing is still huge, right? Especially the login screens.
Absolutely. Spoofed login screens are a classic technique. An attacker might send a phishing email with a link that looks legitimate but goes to a fake login page they control. Or if they've compromised a user's machine, they might pop up a fake login prompt locally. User types in their username and password, thinks they're logging in normally, but they've just handed their credentials directly to the attacker.
So how do we fight back? What are the key technical defenses against these credential attacks?
Well, strong password policies are baseline hygiene complexity, length, history, not reusing passwords. But technically, there are crucial controls. First, setting clipping levels. This means configuring the system to limit the number of failed login attempts allowed within a certain time period before the account gets locked out. Maybe 5 bad attempts in 15 minutes locks the account for an hour. This directly thwarts online brute force and dictionary attacks. Second, and absolutely essential, is using salts. A salt is just a unique random value that's added to each user's password before it gets hashed and stored in the database. Even if 2 users happen to choose the same password, because their salts are different, their stored password hashes will be completely different. This completely defeats standard rainbow tables because the attacker would need a separate rainbow table for every possible salt value, which is computationally infeasible. Salting forces them back to cracking each password hash individually, which is much slower.
Managing all these unique, complex passwords becomes a real headache for users, though. That's where password managers come in, but they have their own risks, too.
They do. Password managers, or vaults, are generally a very good thing. They store all your unique, complex passwords for different sites and services in an encrypted database. You only need to remember one single, very strong master password to unlock the vault. It improves user security hygiene massively. The downside: that master password becomes a critical single point of failure, or SBO. If an attacker gets your master password or compromises the vault software itself, they potentially get all your other passwords. Huge risk concentration.
And the alternative some companies use is password synchronization.
Right. Password synchronization aims for convenience. It means you use the same password across multiple different systems or applications within the organization. Change it in one place, and it changes everywhere. This simplifies administration and the user experience. But from a security perspective, it creates a nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
If that one single password gets compromised through phishing, malware, whatever, the attacker instantly gains access to every system that uses it. It creates a massive blast radius from a single point of compromise, a very dangerous single key approach.
So it's a trade-off again. The SBIF risk of a password manager versus the potentially wider blast radius of synchronization if that one password gets popped.
Exactly. Security teams have to weigh those risks carefully based on their environment and user base.
Okay, let's broaden the view now. Identity management, IAM, isn't just that moment of login. It's bigger. It's about managing that identity across its entire existence within the organization, and sometimes even beyond the organization's borders. Here's where it gets really interesting.
That's right. Talking about the full life cycle. But first, architecturally, organizations need to decide how they manage authorization. How is trust administered? One approach is centralized identity management. Here, a single entity, maybe a main identity server or directory, performs all the authentication and authorization checks for the entire organization. The big advantage is consistency. Policies are enforced uniformly everywhere, governance is strict, auditing is simpler because it's all in one place. The huge disadvantage: it's a massive single point of failure, SPF. If that central identity server goes down, nobody can log into anything. The entire business can grind to a halt.
Okay, so the opposite would be decentralized, spreading the load, but maybe creating other problems.
Yes, exactly. Decentralized identity management means that multiple different systems, maybe local servers in different branches or departments, handle their own authentication and authorization. The main benefit is resilience. If one local system fails, it doesn't affect the others. The major drawback is governance and consistency. How do you make sure everyone is applying the same security policies? How do you manage updates across all these disparate systems? How do you get a unified view for auditing? It can become very complex and fragmented.
So most large places probably end up somewhere in the middle.
Almost always. The most common approach in large organizations is a hybrid model. You centralize the really critical enterprise-wide services, maybe core business applications, email, everybody. But you might allow some level of decentralized or local administration for less critical systems or specific departmental needs. You try to get the best of both worlds, balancing central control with local flexibility and resilience.
And one of the biggest drivers for centralization, or at least having a central authority, is to enable single sign-on, SSO.
Absolutely. Yeah. Single sign-on, SSO, is a huge usability win. The idea is simple. A user authenticates, once logs in one time with one set of credentials, and then they gain access to multiple different applications and resources within that same organization's security domain without having to log in again each time. The main benefit is user convenience. It cuts down on password fatigue, reduces the chance of users writing passwords down or reusing weak ones. The main security risk: that single SSO account becomes an incredibly high-value target. If an attacker compromises your primary SSO credentials, they potentially get access to everything you have access to. Back to that SPF idea, but at the credential level. Under the hood, SSO systems often rely on directory services using protocols like LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, to look up user information and permissions from that central store.
When you talk SSO, especially in corporate environments, one protocol comes up constantly: Kerberos. I really need to dig into how that works.
Kerberos, yes. It's a classic and really quite clever. It's a network authentication protocol designed specifically to provide strong authentication for client-server applications using secret key cryptography. A key goal of Kerberos is to achieve mutual authentication. That means the client proves its identity to the server, and the server proves its identity back to the client. And crucially, it does all of this without ever sending the user's password or even a hash of the password across the network where it could be sniffed.
Okay, walk us through that. How does it manage secure authentication without sending the password? It sounds complex.
It involves a few moving parts and a trusted third party called the Key Distribution Center, or KDC. The KDC itself actually contains two logical services, the authentication server, AS, and the ticket granting service, TGS. So here's the flow. One, the user, we call them the principal, wants to log in. They type their username and password into their client machine. The client software takes the password and converts it into a secret cryptographic key, often through hashing. Two, the client sends the username to the authentication server AS, part of the KDC, basically saying, "Hi, I'm user Bob. I want to authenticate." Three, the AS checks if user Bob exists. If so, it generates a unique temporary session key. This key will be used for communication between the client and the ticket granting service, TGS. Four, now the clever part, the AS sends back two things to the client. A, the session key, but it's encrypted using user Bob's secret key, the one derived from his password. Only Bob's client can decrypt this. B, something called a ticket granting ticket, TGT. The TGT contains information like Bob's username, the session key, a timestamp, and a lifetime. But the entire TGT is encrypted using the secret key of the ticket granting service, TGS. The client can't read the TGT itself.
Wait, so the client gets this encrypted blob, the TGT, and it gets the session key encrypted with its own key. The password hash never left the client machine.
Exactly. The client uses its locally derived secret key from the password to decrypt the session key. Now, the client holds two things, the decrypted client TGS session key and the encrypted TGT, which acts like a temporary passport.
Okay, so Bob is authenticated to the KDC, but he hasn't accessed any actual service yet, like a file server. How does that happen?
Right. Now, Bob wants to access, say, a specific file server, which is another principle in Kerberos. 5. Bob's client sends two things to the ticket granting service, TGS, part of the KDC, the encrypted TGT it received earlier. B. An authenticator, which includes Bob's username and a timestamp, encrypted using the client TGS session key they now share. 6. The TGS uses its own secret key to decrypt the TGT. This proves the TGT is legitimate and came from the AS. It checks the username, timestamp, etc. It also decrypts the authenticator using the session key, which was inside the TGT, to verify the client. 7. If everything checks out, the TGS generates another unique temporary session key, this time for communication between the client and the actual file server. 8. The TGS then creates a service ticket, ST, for the file server. This ST contains Bob's username, the new client server session key, timestamp, lifetime, etc. And the entire ST is encrypted using the file server secret key, which the TGS knows. 9. The TGS sends two things back to the client. A, the encrypted service ticket, STB, the new client server session key, but encrypted using the client TGS session key.
Okay, my head's spinning slightly, but I think I follow. The client decrypts the new session key, holds onto the encrypted service ticket. Now it talks to the file server.
Exactly. Final step, 10. The client sends two things to the file server, .A. The encrypted service ticket, ST, it got from the TGSB, a new authenticator, username, timestamp, encrypted using the new client server session key. 11. The file server uses its own secret key to decrypt the service ticket. This verifies the ticket came from the TGS and contains the client server session key. It uses that key to decrypt the authenticator, verifying the client. If it all matches, the file server trusts that the client is user Bob and grants access based on Bob's permissions for that server. Mutual authentication achieved, no password sent over the wire.
Wow. That intricate dance is what makes it secure against eavesdropping. But it sounds like it has some strict requirements. That complexity must have a weakness somewhere.
It does have a couple of well-known ones. The biggest operational requirement is strict clock synchronization. All the timestamps in the tickets, TGT and ST, are used to prevent replay attacks. For this to work, the clocks on the client, the KDC, and the servers must all be synchronized very closely. The default maximum allowable difference, or skew, is usually only 5 minutes. If clocks drift too far apart, tickets will be considered invalid, and authentication will just fail, causing major operational headaches. Also, while passwords aren't sent over the network, the initial exchange with the AS is potentially vulnerable to offline password guessing attacks if the encryption used is weak, though modern implementations usually mitigate this. And the most catastrophic failure. If an attacker compromises the KDC itself, especially the TGS secret key, often called the Kerberos TGT account key in Active Directory, with that key, an attacker can forge any TGT they want. This is the infamous golden ticket attack. A golden ticket allows the attacker to impersonate any user, including administrators, and access any service in the Kerberos domain. Game over, essentially. That's why protecting the KDC is absolutely paramount.
Okay, Kerberos handles SSO within an organization, but what about connecting identities across different organizations, like using my work login to access a cloud service,
Yeah.
the federation?
Exactly. Federated Identity Management, FIM, is the next evolution. It extends those SSO principles across organizational boundaries. It allows different security domains of your company, the identity provider or IDP, and say a SaaS vendor like Salesforce, service provider or SP, or maybe a business partner to establish trust. Your company can vouch for your identity, and the SaaS vendor can trust that assertion without needing its own copy of your password. It makes your identity portable. This is fundamental for almost all modern cloud adoption and B2B collaboration. And often, this capability is delivered via cloud services themselves, known as Identity as a Service, IDS. IDS providers offer cloud-based SSO, FIM, MFA, password management, etc. It simplifies deployment and management, offers scalability. The downside, you're outsourcing a critical security function, placing trust in the third party, and creating another potential SPF if that IDS vendor has an outage.
For this cross-domain trust to actually work, everyone needs to speak the same language. We need standard protocols for federation. Let's clarify the big three: SAML, OAuth 2.0, and OpenID Connect, OIDC. They often get confused.
They do, and the distinction is critical. Let's start with SAML, Security Assertion Markup Language. SAML is an XML-based standard specifically designed for exchanging both authentication and authorization data between parties, typically between an identity provider, IDP, and a service provider, SP. When you click Login with your corporate account on a third-party website, and it redirects you to your company's login page, then back to the website logged in, that's very often SAML under the covers. The IDP sends a digitally signed SAML assertion to the SP, saying, yep, we authenticated this user, and here are some attributes about them, like their role or email address, end quote. Now let's tackle the pair that causes the most confusion, OAuth 2.0 and OpenID Connect, OIDC. It is absolutely vital to remember this. OAuth 2.0 is an authorization framework, not an authentication protocol. OAuth is all about delegation. It allows a user to grant a third-party application limited access to their resources on another service without giving them their password. Think about when a photo editing app asks for permission to access your photos stored in Google Drive or Dropbox. You're using OAuth to grant that specific permission. For example, read-write access to only the Photos folder for a limited time. OAuth defines how that app gets an access token to make those authorized API calls. It says nothing about who you are.
Okay, so OAuth is purely about, can this app access my stuff? It doesn't prove it's really me using the app. How do we get the identity part?
That's exactly where OpenID Connect OIDC fits in. OIDC is an authentication layer built on top of OAuth 2.0. It leverages the OAuth 2.0 flows, but adds mechanisms to verify the end user's identity and obtain basic profile information about them, like name, email, profile picture, in a standardized way. OIDC introduces the concept of an ID token, which is a specific type of security token, usually a JWT JSON web token, that contains claims about the authentication event, who authenticated when, how, and the user's identity. So when you see those login with Google, login with Facebook, login with Apple buttons everywhere, that's typically OIDC in action. It uses the OF framework for the authorization flows needed to get that ID token, which then proves your identity to the application, the relying party or RP.
Got it. SAML authentication plus authorization, mostly web SSO. OAuth 2.0 authorization only, delegated access for apps. OIDC equals authentication layer on top of OAuth 2.0, proving user identity via ID token. That clarifies it a lot.
Okay, so we've identified the user, we've authenticated them. Now, the system needs to decide exactly what they're allowed to do. It consults its internal rulebook. We're now talking about the authorization models, the different philosophical and technical approaches to defining and enforcing those access rules.
Before we jump into the specific models, there's one foundational security principle that applies pretty much everywhere, isn't there? Implicit deny.
Absolutely non-negotiable. Implicit deny, sometimes called deny by default, is fundamental. It doesn't matter which model you use, this principle should always underpin it. It simply means if access is not explicitly granted by a specific rule or policy, then it must be denied. This ensures there are no accidental holes. Any new resource, any new user, anything not specifically covered by an allow rule defaults to being inaccessible. It's the ultimate fail-safe posture for authorization.
And conceptually, overseeing all these access requests is this abstract idea of the reference monitor.
Right. The reference monitor isn't usually a single piece of software, but rather an abstract concept representing the core security kernel of the system that enforces the access control policy. It's the theoretical gatekeeper that mediates every single attempt by a subject, user, process, to access an object, file, resource, service. For a reference monitor implementation, the actual code doing the checks, to be considered trustworthy, it absolutely must have 3 properties. 1, always invoked. It can't be bypassed. Every single access request must go through it, no exceptions. 2, tamper-resistant. It must be protected from modification or interference, especially by attackers or unauthorized users. Its integrity must be assured. 3, verifiable. It must be small enough and simple enough in its design that it can be rigorously tested, analyzed, and ideally formally proven to be correct and functioning according to the security policy.
Okay, makes sense. Let's get into the actual models now, starting with the one most people probably encounter every day on their own computers: discretionary access control.
Discretionary access control, DAC, is probably the most common and intuitive model. The key word is discretionary. In a DECA system, the owner of a resource, the person who created a file, for example, has the discretion to decide who else can access it and what permissions, read, write, execute, they get. This is typically implemented using access control lists, ACLs, which you see in Windows file permissions, Linux file permissions, etc. Each resource had a list saying user Alice can read, group admins can read, write. It's flexible and easy for users to understand. The big downside, it often leads to permission creep. Users tend to grant overly broad permissions for convenience, and tracking who has access to what across a large system becomes incredibly complex and messy. Security posture can degrade quickly.
Right. Now let's swing to the other extreme: the highly structured, top-down approach used in military and intelligence communities: mandatory access control.
Mandatory access control, MAC, is the complete opposite of DC. Here, access decisions are not left to the discretion of the data owner. They are mandated by the system based on a centrally defined policy. MT relies on security labels. Both subjects, users, processes, and objects, files, data are assigned labels. A subject's label represents their clearance level. For example, top secret, secret, confidential, and potentially categories or compartments they have access to, need to know. An object's label represents its classification and categories. The system then enforces rules based on comparing the subject's label to the object's label. Can the secret user read that top secret file? The system decides based on fixed rules, not the file owner. It's often called a non-discretionary lattice-based model because you can visualize the different classification levels and categories forming a mathematical lattice structure.
And MSE has 2 very famous underlying models that focus on different security goals: Bell-LaPadula and BIBA.
Exactly. These are the foundational theoretical models for MSE. Bell-LaPadula is focused entirely on confidentiality, preventing unauthorized disclosure of information. Its core rules are designed to prevent information from flowing downwards to less trusted levels. The rules are: 1. Simple security property, no read-up. A subject cannot read information from an object that has a higher security classification than the subject's clearance. A secret user can't read a top-secret file. 2. Property, star property, no write-down. A subject cannot write information to an object that has a lower security classification than the subject's clearance. A top-secret user can't write data into a secret file. This prevents accidental or malicious leakage of sensitive data downwards.
Okay, so Bell-LaPadula, confidentiality. What about BIBA?
BIBA is focused entirely on integrity, preventing unauthorized or improper modification of information. Its goal is to prevent information from flowing upwards from less trusted levels or downwards in a way that corrupts higher integrity data. Its rules are essentially the inverse of Bell-LaPadula. 1. Simple integrity axiom, no read down. A subject cannot read data from an object at a lower integrity level. A user working with high integrity data shouldn't read potentially corrupted low integrity data. 2. Integrity axiom, start integrity axiom, no write-up. A subject cannot write data to an object at a higher integrity level. A process running at low integrity can't modify critical high-integrity system files.
So Bell-LaPadula protects secrets from leaking out. BIBA protects data from being corrupted by less trustworthy sources. You'd choose based on your primary security goal.
Precisely. Confidentiality needed, Bell-LaPadula. Integrity needed, BIBA. Real systems might use variations or combinations.
MSC sounds very rigid, probably overkill for most businesses. What's the common middle ground for large organizations? That seems to be role-based access control.
Yes. Role-based access control, RBAC, is arguably the dominant model in enterprise environments today, mainly because it scales well and simplifies administration. In RBAC, access permissions aren't assigned directly to individual users. Instead, permissions are associated with specific roles. For example, accountant, help desk tier 1, database administrator, marketing manager. Users are then assigned to one or more roles based on their job function or responsibilities. They inherit the permissions associated with those roles. This makes managing access much easier. When someone changes jobs, you just change their role assignment instead of having to manually adjust hundreds of individual permissions. It also helps enforce least privilege and makes auditing much clearer. You audit the role's permissions and the user's role assignment. It significantly reduces that permission creep problem we see with DC.
We also hear about rule-based access control. How does that fit in? Is it different from RBAC?
Rule-based access control, sometimes RBAC or RBAC when combined with roles, typically refers to access decisions based on global rules or conditions that apply across the board, often regardless of specific user identity or role, although they can be combined. Think of a firewall. A firewall applies rules like block incoming traffic on port 23, or allow traffic from IP address X to server Y on port 80. These are system-wide rules based on attributes of the connection or request itself. You might integrate this with RBAC. For example, users in the remote access role are allowed VPN access, role-based, but only if their connection originates from a trusted IP address range, rule-based. So rules often act as additional filters on top of role assignments.
Okay. Now, pushing towards even more flexibility and granularity, we have the more modern models, attribute-based and risk-based. Let's start with ABAC.
Attribute-based access control, ABAC, is seen by many as the next generation, offering the most flexibility and fine-grained control. Instead of just looking at the user's role, ABAC makes access decisions based on evaluating rules against various attributes of the subject, the object, the action being requested, and even the environment. Attributes could include subject attributes, role, department, security clearance, training completed, location, object attributes, data classification, project code, sensitivity level, owner, action attributes, read, write, delete, approve, execute, environmental attributes, time of day, current threat level, IP address, device type, corporate versus personal, network location. The policy might look like: allow users with role doctor, object attribute, to read action patient records, object attribute, if the access time is during working hours, environment attribute, and the access device is a hospital-managed tablet, environment attribute. This allows for incredibly rich, context-aware authorization policies. It's very powerful, especially in complex environments like cloud and software-defined networking, SDN, but it also requires careful planning and management of all those attributes.
And taking that dynamic nature even further is risk-based access control. It sounds like it calculates things on the fly.
Yeah. Exactly. Risk-based access control, RBAC, but different from role-based, also called adaptive access control, makes authorization decisions dynamically in real time based on the calculated risk associated with the access request. The system assesses various factors to estimate a risk score for the current request. Factors might include user context. Is this login from a usual location device time? Is the user's behavior anomalous? User risk history. Has this account shown signs of compromise recently? Resource sensitivity. How critical is the data or system being accessed? Threat intelligence. Is the source IP address known to be malicious? The system calculates a risk score, often likelihood, X impact, and compares it against predefined thresholds. If the risk is low, access might be granted seamlessly. If the risk is medium, example, login from a new country, the system might require a step-up authentication, like prompting for an additional MFA factor. If the risk is high, access might be blocked entirely and an alert generated. It moves away from static yes-no decisions toward a more fluid, adaptive approach based on the real-time context and threat landscape.
Very cool. Okay, let's shift gears slightly and talk about the network protocols that often implement the AAA functions, especially for network access. Radius versus TACACS plus JAME. This always seems to trip people up.
It does, and the differences are important, especially for network engineers and security folks. Let's start with Radius, remote authentication, dial, and user service. It's been around a long time, originally for dial-up, now widely used for VPNs, wireless, 802.1x, network switches. Key things about Radius. It primarily uses UDP for transport. UDP is connectionless, faster, but less reliable than TCP. Critically, standard Radius only encrypts the password field in an access request packet. The username and other attributes are typically sent in clear text. This is a significant security weakness. It often combines authentication and authorization. The Radius server sends back an access accept message, which might include authorization attributes like VLAN assignment or an ACL, along with the acceptance. Accounting is handled separately.
Okay, UDP encrypts only the password, combines auth-not-c. How does TACACS Plus differ? Why is it often preferred for managing network devices like routers and switches?
TACACS Plus, Terminal Access Control System Plus. The Plus is important. It's a Cisco-developed enhancement over older TACACS. Is generally considered more robust and secure, especially for device administration. Key differences. It uses TCP, port 49, for transport. TCP provides reliable, connection-oriented communication. It encrypts the entire body of the packet, not just the password. This protects all the attributes, username, request, privilege level, etc., from eavesdropping. Much better confidentiality. Its biggest advantage is that it explicitly separates authentication, authorization, and accounting into distinct message types and processes. This is true AAA separation. This separation allows for much more granular control. You can authenticate the user, then have a separate authorization phase where you define exactly which commands that user is allowed to execute on the network device. Example, allow show run but deny configure terminal. Accounting is also a separate process. This fine-grained command authorization is why TACACS Plus is the preferred choice for securing administrative access to critical network infrastructure.
So TACACS Plus equals TCP. Encrypts everything. True AAA separation, better for granular device control. RadioS UDP, password-only encryption. Auth-NOX-Z combined, common for user network access.
That's a good summary. There's also a newer protocol called Diameter, which was designed as a successor to Radius, addressing many of its limitations. It's more extensible, uses TCP or SCTP, has better security features, but it's not backward compatible with Radius. You see Diameter used more in modern telecommunications networks like 4G and 5G mobile infrastructure for AAA functions.
Okay, we've covered models, protocols, but none of it matters if the underlying identity system itself is vulnerable. And let's be honest, for a huge number of organizations, that means Active Directory. AD is often the keys to the kingdom, making it a massive target and source of risk.
Absolutely. Securing Active Directory is non-negotiable for anyone using it. Attackers know it's the central hub for identity and authentication in Windows environments. They often start with the basics, the common entry points. Looking for servers that are incompletely patched, running outdated operating systems or applications, exploiting misconfigurations like weak Kerberos encryption types enabled, finding gaps in endpoint protection or AV coverage, or targeting insecurely developed applications that interact with AD. Low-hanging fruit. But their real goal is usually credential theft. They want to get their hands on credentials that grant them significant access.
And which accounts are the crown jewels they're usually after, the ones that need the absolute strongest protection?
They're looking for accounts with persistent, high-level privileges. These are typically the built-in administrative groups. Enterprise admins, highest level in an AD forest. Domain admins, highest level in a specific domain. And the local administrators group on member servers and workstations. Compromising any user in these groups gives attackers immense power. They also target specific high-value systems, especially domain controllers, DCs. A compromised DC is essentially game over for the domain. The attacker can potentially extract all password hashes, create forged Kerberos tickets like that golden ticket we talked about, modify group memberships. They own the identity infrastructure. VIP accounts executives, key finance personnel are also targets, not necessarily for infrastructure control, but for accessing sensitive data or initiating fraudulent transactions. The risk gets amplified dramatically when administrators use these super-privileged accounts for everyday tasks, like checking email or browsing the web. That's just asking for trouble via phishing or malware.
So defending AD comes down to minimizing that attack surface and preventing privilege escalation wherever possible.
Precisely. The core principle must be implementing a least privilege administrative model. This means administrators should only have the absolute minimum privileges necessary to perform their specific job functions. Don't just dump everyone into domain admins just in case. Use delegated permissions, custom roles, maybe privileged access management, PM solutions. A critical practice is requiring administrators to use two separate accounts. 1. A standard, non-privileged user account for daily activities like email, web browsing, document editing. 2. A separate, highly privileged administrative account used only for performing specific administrative tasks, and ideally only logged into from secured administrative workstations, SIWs, or via PAM jump boxes. Log off immediately when done. You must never administer a trusted system, like a DC, from a less trusted host, like your everyday workstation. That risks credential theft via pass the hash or other techniques. And absolutely, multi-factor authentication, FFA, should be mandatory for all accounts with administrative privileges, no exceptions. And keep those domain controllers physically secure, too.
Beyond the technical controls for AD, there are fundamental administrative controls that are crucial for IAM. Separation of duties comes to mind.
Separation of duties, SOD, is a cornerstone of internal control, designed to prevent fraud, conflict of interest, and errors. The principle is simple. Divide critical tasks or responsibilities among multiple people so that no single individual has complete control over a high-risk process from start to finish. Classic example. In finance, the person who can approve purchase orders should not be the same person who can issue payments. Or the person who can create a new vendor in the system shouldn't be the one approving invoices from that vendor. This forces collusion between individuals to commit fraud, making it harder and increasing the chance of detection. It's a vital control for mitigating insider risk.
Okay, so we've provisioned accounts, assigned privileges using models like RBAC, applied controls like SOD, but identity isn't static. People join, leave, change roles. This brings us to the identity lifecycle management.
Right. The Identity and Access Provisioning Lifecycle, ILM, or simply Identity Lifecycle Management, is about managing identities from cradle to grave. It's essential for maintaining accuracy and security over time. It typically involves three main phases. 1. Provisioning. This is the beginning. Creating the user account when someone joins the organization or needs access to a new system. It involves identity proofing, verifying they are who they say they are, creating the account itself, and assigning the initial set of access rights and privileges, ideally based on their role, using RBAC.
Phase 2 is where we fight that permission creep we talked about earlier, the ongoing maintenance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Phase 2 is review, or attestation. This involves regular, periodic user access reviews, UARs. Managers or application owners need to review the access rights of the people reporting to them or using their systems to ensure those rights are still appropriate for their current job roles and responsibilities. Is this access still needed? Is the level of privilege still correct? This is absolutely critical, especially for privileged accounts. Compliance frameworks like SOX, IPA, PCI DSS often mandate regular access reviews. Without them, users inevitably accumulate unnecessary privileges over time, increasing the attack surface.
And the final phase, possibly the one most critical for preventing lingering risks, revocation or deprovisioning. This has to be timely and efficient. When an employee leaves the company, changes roles significantly, or a contractor's engagement ends, their access must be revoked promptly. Accounts need to be disabled or deleted. Failure to do this creates orphaned accounts, active accounts that are no longer associated with a current legitimate user. These are gold mines for attackers, or sometimes even disgruntled former employees. Timely revocation is one of the most effective ways to mitigate insider threats and reduce the attack surface from forgotten accounts.
So we have all these processes, models, controls, but how do we ensure accountability? How do we know what's actually happening? That comes back to monitoring and auditing.
Absolutely. The accountability pillar relies entirely on effective monitoring and auditing. This means comprehensive auditing. Logging all significant security-related events. What needs logging? All activity by high-privileged accounts. Every command they run, every change they make. All login attempts, both successful and failed. Failed attempts can indicate brute force attacks. Successful logins tell you who accessed what, when. Access to sensitive files or data, reads, modifications, deletions, changes to security configurations, permissions, group memberships, specific security violations detected by systems. These logs need to be generated by servers, firewalls, applications, network devices, everything.
But that generates a mountain of data. How can anyone possibly make sense of it all? That's where SIAM comes in.
Exactly. Collecting logs is just the first step. Making sense of them requires a security information and event management, SIEM system. A SIEM's job is to 1. Gather logs from all those diverse sources across the enterprise. 2. Normalize the logs into a common format, because every vendor logs things differently. 3. Correlate events across different systems to identify patterns of potential security incidents that wouldn't be obvious from looking at individual logs in isolation. For example, a SIEM might correlate failed login attempts on multiple servers from the same source IP, followed by a successful login on one server, then unusual network traffic originating from that server. That pattern screams compromise. A human looking at separate logs might easily miss it. SIEM provides situational awareness. It helps analysts detect threats faster and respond more effectively.
And those logs themselves become incredibly valuable, containing the evidence of potentially malicious activity. Attackers know this, so protecting the logs is crucial.
Paramount. Audit logs are the record. Attackers who gain access to a system will often try to cover their tracks by modifying or deleting the logs, a process sometimes called scrubbing. Therefore, audit log protection is critical. Logs should ideally be stored securely, often forwarded in near real time to a dedicated hardened central log server, or SAM, protected from unauthorized modification. This might involve using write once, read many, worm storage, setting strict file permissions, or using cryptographic hashing or digital signatures to ensure log integrity. Retained for a sufficient period according to policy and compliance requirements. If an attacker can delete the logs, your accountability is gone, and investigation becomes incredibly difficult.
Okay, that brings us towards the end of this pretty deep dive into identity and access management. We've covered a lot of ground. We started with those fundamental AAA pillars: identification, authentication, authorization, accountability. We dug into the tech of proving identity, the factors, have our MFA, tokens, synchronous versus asynchronous, biometrics, and their error rates of FRR, FODR. We looked at the scope shift from internal SSO, maybe using Kerberos, to crossing boundaries with federated identity management using standards like SAML, OAuth, and OIDC. And we explored the different ways to actually authorize access from DEC and MAC, Bella Padula, Biba, to the more common RBAC, and the flexible future with ABAC and risk-based models. Plus, those network AAA protocols, Radius and TACACS, plus a
I think the key thing to remember, the major takeaway, is that IAM isn't just a technology you install. It's an ongoing process, a life cycle. It requires constant attention, policy enforcement, and review. And in modern security thinking, especially with zero-trust architectures becoming more prevalent, identity is the new perimeter. It doesn't matter so much where the user is, in the office, at home, on the road, or what device they're using. What matters is verifying their identity strongly and enforcing granular access based on that identity and context. The continued rigorous management of privilege, enforcing least privilege, using controls like separation of duties, timely reviews, and revocation, that's really what separates a reasonably secure organization from a highly vulnerable one.
Well said. Before we sign off, we always like to leave you, our listeners, with something to chew on. A final provocative thought. We've talked about the shift towards extremely granular, context-aware authorization using attribute-based access control and risk-based access control. These systems make decisions dynamically, in real time, based on potentially complex calculations and a wide range of inputs. So, here's the thought. What new challenges does this high level of dynamism and real-time calculation introduce for traditional compliance and auditing efforts? How do you effectively audit a system where access isn't just based on static roles and rules, but on constantly changing attributes and risk scores? How do you prove compliance when the policy logic itself is so fluid?
That's a really interesting question. It definitely shifts the focus for auditors. Something to ponder.
Indeed. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.